When it comes to the conflict in Yemen, Britain seems to be on both sides of the war. British Prime Minister Theresa May has reportedly called on Saudi Arabia to ease a cruel blockade against its war-torn neighbour, Yemen, in order to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. However, since the Saudi-led war on Yemen began, the British military industry has earned billions of pounds in revenue through selling arms to the Saudi kingdom. This conflicting relationship has sparked fierce criticism from human rights campaigners. The British Prime Minister made the appeal as she met with King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in November during a visit to Riyadh. This trip marked her second visit to Saudi Arabia in less than a year. During the trip, she raised concerns over the crisis in Yemen. The Prime Minister made clear that the flow of commercial supplies must be resumed if we are to avert a humanitarian catastrophe, said May's office. They added they agreed that steps needed to be taken as a matter of urgency to address this. But at the very same time, the United Kingdom, along with America, has been a major supporter of the Riyadh-led coalition of countries involved in a bloody military campaign against Yemen since early 2015. The Saudi-led coalition's blockade of ports has hindered the supply of food, water and other materials to Yemen, a small impoverished nation which is heading for a large-scale famine. May has been under fire by opposition figures and leading human rights groups at home and abroad for refusing to suspend British arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Why does Britain care so much about its relationship with Saudi Arabia? And what is the UK's involvement with the war in Yemen? Simple questions with important answers. What does the British public know about that war in Yemen? And are citizens here in London aware of Britain's connection to that conflict? We asked them.
I am aware there's a war. I'm not aware of any British involvement at this moment in time, but I'm aware of the conflict and the Saudi support and rebels in the area. So I'm aware of the war, yeah.
I know a reasonable amount, and I'm aware that the British help with intelligence to help the Saudis to bomb, for example, 5 MSF hospitals, for which there's been no replacement.
I'm aware of our involvement in terms of supplying arms to Saudi, and Saudi being a lead factor in a lot of killings going on in Yemen, yeah.
I'm not aware of Britain's connections in the war.
I'm not that aware. I'm aware they have some involvement, but that's about it. I don't really know history or anything else about it, to be honest.
That there's a conflict going on. I don't know the details really, but Saudi Arabia is doing this pretty horrible campaign where they're bombing these innocent civilians, really, and America's supporting them, and I assume the UK is supporting them too.
Well, they've been in there for quite a while, actually, and they've been providing arms, I believe, but surreptitiously. I believe. I could be wrong.
No, actually not. I never heard of it.
Not many people in the world, in fact, they know about the connection of Britain in Yemen. Even British people don't know about it. Only a small section of them they know. And these people, they go on demonstration and they protest about British arms sales to Saudi Arabia. It is amazing that how much Britain sold arms to Saudi Arabia for the last few years. But not many people know about it, and I think this is going to be exposed gradually in the future, because there will be demonstrations. Some of the MPs opposing to this policy will expose it again.
I know a lot about the war in Yemen, that the most important part that I know about it is the fact that it is illegal, and that it has led to the commission of untold amount of crimes, especially crimes against humanity because of the illegal nature of the war, and it has led to the commission of untold amount of war crimes, genocide, and of course crimes against humanity. The war against Yemen has created the worst humanitarian catastrophe ever in the history, with the outbreak of cholera affecting over 1 million people. And we are questioning ourselves, how did the international community find itself ganging up on the poorest nation in the Gulf states and brutalizing it in this illegal, unhuman way?
Theresa May has visited Saudi Arabia twice since becoming Prime Minister. Why is the Saudi kingdom so important to the UK? Here's the public's view.
Well, it's clearly a major oil supplier, and also it's a major customer.
I'm aware there's a lot of trade there, as indeed there has been a visit from France's Premier just this week, and they've signed a load of trade deals. It's a blurring of the lines, in my opinion. You know, what is justified, what's not justified. Trade getting in the way of war. I mean, I feel immensely for the people of Yemen, because, you know, at the end of the day, these are the guys that are getting caught in the middle of it all.
Oil. Simple as that, oil.
I know why it's important to her, and that's because of the massive arms deal, the Al Alamama, billions of pounds worth of arms, and that's top of her priority, I think.
Because we do a lot of trade with Saudi Arabia.
The money, the oil, that's and the natural resources that are there. You know, it's been a fairly significant investment for them for a long time.
Well, it's a very rich country, isn't it? For a start. I've been there myself on the way back from the Gulf War. So, very rich country.
Maybe for economic interest, mainly, because Saudi Arabia have a lot of money and can invest in the UK. That could be an idea.
Well, Saudi Arabia is very important to UK, and if you remember, there was a deal decades ago called the Yamama deal, arm deal, and it was described as the deal of the century. So the connection between Britain and Saudi Arabia has been for a long time. Saudi Arabia is considered to be an ally and a friend to British government, and they say it all the time. They don't want to break any relation with Saudi Arabia. So May went twice to Saudi Arabia, partly because they are leaving the EU, and also they wanted to sell arms. This is why she went to some other Arab countries like Jordan and so on, to strengthen the link with them when they leave the EU.
Who has placed the Saudi regime in Saudi Arabia in the first place about 100 years ago? It was Britain, as you all know. And the regime has always been dependent on Britain and the US for maintaining its throne. And so Britain in return has been colonizing the place and colonizing the Muslim world via the Saudi regime, puppet regime. So there's also the economic side to it, which is of course taking a lot of the oil of the country and many other of its other resources, plus the selling of weapons, huge amounts of sales of weapons. I mean, we know about the 80s Al-Yamama deal. We also know about recent £3 to £6 billion worth of weaponry sold to them, which has been used to kill civilians for the past 2.5 years.
Britain has sold over £3 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia, despite its controversial human rights record. What does the British public think about this?
Well, it's a very difficult issue. I mean, obviously they have human rights problems, but so do many countries which we and other Western powers do business with. It's very hard to have a completely pure foreign relations policy, I think.
It's about industry, big money. You know, we are in this global economy which unfortunately rules a lot of our lives.
Well, you know, we visit there and Prince Charles visits there and the arms trade is never raised. I've been involved in trying to get Saudis out of prison there. For example, Walid Aker, who's a human rights lawyer who's been in jail for 15 years for doing nothing. There's a well-known journalist guy who's in jail, but it's a problem the whole way up the Gulf, that anybody who stands up for democracy or defending other people's rights gets put into jail on a fabricated basis.
Well, I think we need to put a bit of a halt on it until we have a proper and thorough investigation. The problem is that whilst we have very good export controls, you only need a minister to overrule them because of the politics, and that's what happens.
It's a serious issue, for sure.
I think it's quite disgusting, very hypocritical of them to do that, and it's just for their own good, really. It's just for their benefit, and it shouldn't be.
Well, they're in Yemen, aren't they? At the moment. They're also in a lot of other countries, surreptitiously, as we know. But what can we do about it? You know, it's people like you maybe making us aware.
I mean, it's obviously those numbers are appalling. Also, looking at some of the gun lobbying in the U.S. with before Trump got elected, you could tell that U.S. has always played a very large role in supplying Saudi Arabia with weaponry. And now, I didn't know about this number, but it shows a lot on how, yes, we can say that we're actively against terrorism, but then if our governments are supplying Saudi Arabia with weapons, it's kind of hard to justify that.
I think it's completely against what the UK usually stand for, the human rights, like the UN and everything. It's against it. Well, the Saudi Arabia isn't a clear country at all.
Well, it is obvious. I mean, it is breaking the international law. This is one known fact. And in fact, Britain is breaking its own law. And there were some statements in the parliament here regarding this. This is why there is a campaign against the arms sales. And this campaign, the people in this campaign, they are taking legal action against British government. And of course, Amnesty International, it says Britain is breaking the international law in this respect, because there is an amendment, there are international clues related to export of arms, and Britain is breaking all of them.
It's a very sickening situation. I myself as a lawyer feel sick to the pit of my belly. I have seen a 100-page legal opinion written by top QCs of this country who are experts on international law, concluding that the sale of weapons to a regime that is oppressive, such as the Saudi regime, is simply illegal under international treaties, under European treaties, European community law, as well as under UK law. So Britain is in breach of 3 separate categories of known laws that have to be enforced. Reality of this is that Britain has never paid any attention to the law. Britain is now disgracing us in the international platform because we have become associates or friends of rogue regimes, selling them weapons illegally and lying to our own parliaments.
The UK claims to be the 3rd largest bilateral donor of aid to Yemen. However, at the very same time, since the beginning of the conflict in Yemen, the United Kingdom has earned £3.3 billion in revenue from arms sales to the Saudi Kingdom. In that time, 12,000 Yemeni citizens have been killed as a direct result of the conflict, leading many to highlight the contradiction in giving aid to Yemen whilst at the same time arming its main aggressor, Saudi Arabia. What is the British public's view regarding Britain selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, which is then using those weapons in the war on Yemen, while at the same time Britain is providing aid to Yemen?
Well, no, yeah, I think it's our responsibility to provide aid to people who need aid, irrespective of other issues.
It's a dichotomy, isn't it? At the end of the day, why wouldn't we provide aid for people that are in trouble around the world? And in actual fact, while our foreign aid budget is enormous and huge, you realise that actually there's a lot of people around the world that are disadvantaged, are displaced through war, through famine, through natural disaster. Perhaps we as a global nation and a global society, we should be doing more to help those people as well.
It's just sick, really, and also the amount of aid that's gone into Yemen, which is supposedly making us feel good, is tiny in comparison with the arms sales. It's immaterial. We've got to force the Saudis to open up the ports again so that the resources can go in to try and help the people, half of whom are starving.
I mean, there's a bit of a conflict there, I think. And I think it's a conflict that needs to be unravelled and quickly.
I think it's good that we're funding aid for Yemen. I'm not aware of specifically what we're selling to Saudi Arabia.
It's a bit of an oxymoron, right? Maybe just don't sell the weapons to the Saudi Arabians in the first place, who are using those to bomb the civilians that they're giving money to. Maybe start a campaign encouraging peace in that area, and maybe, you know, I don't know.
Feed one side, feed another, becoming an overwhelming force all over the world. Yeah, supplying weapons, but then aiding the ones that are being attacked. It all comes across as a bit dirty, to say the least.
Yes, it's completely hypocritical. Like, that's not the thing you're supposed to do, actually. And Britain is completely, yes, it's even going, I don't know if it's going against human rights, like doing this, actually, because they're helping to bomb some innocent people, I mean, maybe.
Well, this is a blunt hypocrisy. I mean, it is well known. The contribution and the help the British government gave to Yemen in 3 years, I think, or 2 years, it was 200 million, 247 million. I mean, this is peanuts. And also, this is against ethics. How could you give you sell arms to Saudi Arabia to destroy people, and you know that, and then you try to give a few pounds to help? That is to show the world that you are helping the Yemeni people. The Yemeni people, they need billions of pounds to restructure the country, which is being destroyed through the weapons, and some of it through the weapons of the British government.
Well, I have coined the term that this is, you see, in history, human beings had several ages. You've got the Stone Age, the Iron Age, and Dinosaur Age, some other age. This age is the age of hypocrisy. What we do is we smack somebody with one hand and we stroke them with the other. Classic domestic violence relationship here. On the one hand, they come to brutalize the civilians of children and women. Children are dying at the rate of 130 a day. So any aid money that they're saying they're giving is actually not coming to the people. Let me tell you where the aid money goes. It goes to Mr. Hadi and his people, who use it for their own personal gains. They have been buying flats in Cairo and restaurants in Turkey. So not a penny of UK money is coming to Yemen anyway. It is hypocrisy, and I don't think the Yemenis welcome that at all.
Should the UK suspend its arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and why? We put that to the general public. Here's what they said.
You know, the problem is that you've got this conflict, haven't you? You've got arms sales versus, you know, and then the amount of money that brings into the country versus, you know, your conscience and the country's conscience. You know, it's a question for Britain, it's a question for America, it's a question for France, it's a question, you know, it's a global question. Do you, you know, it's one of those, you cut off your nose to spite your face. Yeah, probably somewhere in the middle of that, you've got to have a conscience, haven't you? You've got to have some sort of answer to oppression and conflict around the world.
Definitely, the whole way up the Gulf. I do a lot of work in Bahrain, which has the same problem with its leaders and ordinary people being tortured and incarcerated, and we still, you know, sell arms. It's disgraceful.
I certainly think we should put a halt on them, yeah, until we, as I say, have a proper investigation of the human aspects of what's going on out there, and then make a decision after that.
Yes. Yeah.
Why is that?
Because the arms are not going to the right place, and they're being used to bomb civilians, really, and they're propping up a regime that's doing these really terrible things. So until Saudi Arabia stops that, and the UK and other countries can put more effort into diplomacy to stopping that, then they should stop the arms sales.
Well, if it's going to be used for the wrong purposes, yes, because you never know, they might turn them on us.
I don't know, I feel so in this case, but the UK also have to manage his own interest, economic interests, so we cannot, like, I think it provides jobs to the UK people too, so it's a sensitive question, sensitive issue to deal with at a more national level, and this question should be addressed to all the entire people of the UK.
Well, it is obvious, of course, should stop it completely. And I tell you, it is going to be stopped because the campaign against exporting British arms to Saudi Arabia is getting strength, a lot of strength. And from the people themselves and also from international organizations like Human Rights Watch and other organizations. Of course, Britain does not want to be to become a country which is, I mean, you know, Britain has a status, an important status. It doesn't want to lose that status through this. So therefore, I think it should stop export arms to Saudi Arabia. Particularly, Saudi Arabia is not a democratic country. It's a dictatorship. I mean, it is one known fact that Saudi Arabia is one of the most reactionary system in the world. Of course, Britain should stop exporting arms to Saudi Arabia.
Immediately, without any hesitation. It's a very serious situation. People are speaking about, first of all, we know that the war was illegal. It has been illegally executed and it continues to be illegally maintained. And Britain is aware of all of these facts, and it continues to increase its support to the Saudi regime. Initially, there were 80 of our officers inside the war rooms in Riyadh. We now have 125. Some are saying even more. What do you think were they doing in the war rooms? They're not serving teas and coffees. They are helping with the targets. What I'm worried about is that people are speaking, specifically Middle East Eye, for example, are saying that the blockade, which is illegal, which is being used as a weapon of war, is the same thing that Hitler did in the Second World War. Using hunger as a weapon of war is Nazism. I'm very concerned for Britain because it's likely to be facing charges of Nazi-style war crimes.
Many members of the British public aren't aware of the UK's continued arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Perhaps this is no political accident. It might be more politically convenient for the public to be kept uninformed about the UK's sale of arms at the same time as it claims to be supporting the Yemeni people with aid. Let's not forget the weapons sold by Britain are being used to fight a war in Yemen, where thousands have already been killed and injured, at the very same time that Britain is providing aid to the victims. It's a classic example of double standards, a hypocrisy as clear-cut as it is lethal. where the victims are Yemeni citizens and Britain's moral integrity.